The morning light spilled through the tall windows of the art hall, casting long beams across polished floors that echoed with the sound of footsteps, chatter, and the restless energy of creativity on display. The annual spring exhibition had arrived, a gathering where artists, both seasoned and unknown, came to stake their claim on the attention of patrons, collectors, and critics who could, with a word, shape destinies. For many, this was not just an exhibition. It was a chance to be seen, to be validated, to be chosen. And yet, amid the bustle and grandeur, sat one small booth, modest and almost invisible, tucked away in a corner where shadows lingered longer than light. This was Clara's booth. She wasn't the kind of artist who demanded attention with loud colors or grand gestures. Her presence, like her art, was quiet, almost fragile, the sort of thing that asked you to lean in rather than shout out. Her display consisted of a few sketches pinned carefully onto boards, their simplicity stark against the neighboring explosions of oil, acrylic, and mixed media works. At the center of her collection lay a single sketch. It wasn't large, just an 11 by -14 sheet of textured paper, edges slightly curled from the pressure of her pencil. But it was, to her, the most personal thing she had ever created. She had drawn it late one night, in the silence between midnight and dawn, when the world outside her window had gone still and her own thoughts felt like whispers of truth too raw to ignore. Every line carried weight, every shade was intentional. It wasn't a sketch of something, it was a sketch of herself, in all the ways she could never put into words. And yet, no one noticed. The morning crowd moved quickly past her booth, eyes darting to brighter, bolder displays. Collectors paused at canvases dripping with color. Critics scribbled notes before massive installations, and even passersby with no intention of buying stopped to admire sculptures that gleamed under spotlights. But Clara, she received only passing glances, polite smiles, and the occasional nod that carried no real interest. Hours passed this way. Her heart sank a little more with each dismissal. She tried to smile, tried to look approachable, but inside she felt the ache of invisibility pressing down heavier than the crowd around her. It was not the first time she had felt it. Clara had always been the one overlooked. In school, her drawings were often seen as too simple. At art groups, her quiet demeanor was overshadowed by louder personalities who sold themselves as much as their work. Even here, at this exhibition she had saved for, prepared for, dreamed about, her sketch might as well have been invisible. And yet, she stayed, because deep inside, she couldn't give up on the hope, however fragile, that someone, someday, would look closer, that maybe, just maybe, her art would find the eyes it was meant for. The noise of the exhibition swelled as more guests poured in. Laughter, clinking glasses, murmurs of critique and praise created a current that carried everyone along. But Clara's booth remained still, her presence more like a shadow in the corner than part of the main event. She adjusted the sketch gently on its stand, smoothing the paper with her fingertips, as though touch alone could give it strength. She whispered inwardly, "Stay strong, you mean something, even if no one sees it." And then a figure entered the hall. Unlike the others, his arrival did not draw attention with noise or flair. There was no entourage, no booming laugh, no flamboyant attire to announce him. Instead, he moved with quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need to demand attention because it already had it. His steps were measured, his gaze calm but sharp, as though every detail in the hall was being catalogued and weighed against an invisible scale only he understood. Few noticed him, but those who did whispered his name. Mr. Alexander Thornton. He was an art dealer of repute, a man who had turned unknowns into icons, whose eye for talent had built legacies and fortunes. Collectors trusted him, artists both revered and feared him. His presence in any hall meant possibility. Possibility that could change a life forever. But Clara didn't know he was there. Not yet. She was too busy watching another group pass her booth without pausing, their laughter stinging as they hurried on. She sighed quietly, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, trying to focus on breathing, on not letting disappointment win. And then, the air shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even obvious. But Clara felt it, like the moment when a room falls silent without reason, or when a breeze brushes your cheek, making you turn. A shadow crossed her booth, but unlike all the others, this one did not pass. It lingered. Her heart beat once, hard. Slowly, she looked up. There he was, tall, composed, his salt and pepper hair neatly swept back, his tailored coat a shade of charcoal that blended into the background. but his presence was undeniable. His eyes, sharp and deliberate, were not wandering across her collection like others had. They were fixed on the sketch. Clara froze. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. The chatter of the hall faded to a dull hum. The footsteps blurred into background noise, and all that existed was this man's gaze and her drawing. He leaned slightly closer, not hurried, not distracted, his hands folded behind his back, his posture suggesting not curiosity, but scrutiny, the kind reserved for something that had caught him off guard in the best way. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She didn't dare interrupt. She didn't dare believe. He stayed there, silent, studying. And for the first time all day, someone wasn't just looking. Someone was seeing. The hum of the exhibition never stopped. Laughter from one end, hushed debates from another. Clinking glasses carried across the hall as patrons mingled with critics, curators, and ambitious creators, all vying for attention. Yet, in the corner of that grand hall, a rare silence formed. It surrounded Clara's booth, where a man had stopped not to pass by, not to offer polite acknowledgement, but to stand in stillness, eyes fixed on the sketch everyone else ignored. Mr. Alexander Thornton. Though Clara did not know his name, others in the hall whispered it with a subtle reverence. A pair of collectors glanced over, nudging one another before lowering their voices. "That's Thornton, isn't it?" "It is. Look at him, he's stopped." Words spread like a ripple, quiet yet persistent. For Thornton was not just an art dealer, he was a judge of hidden worth. His discoveries had turned overlooked artists into sensations, their works vaulted from dusty corners into luminous galleries. When Thornton stopped, it meant something. And now, he was standing at Clara's booth, his gaze locked upon her sketch. Clara herself could hardly breathe. She had spent the better part of the day battling invisibility. Every time someone walked by without a second glance, she felt a small wound. But this man, this stranger with eyes like tempered steel, had changed the air around her. He hadn't spoken, he hadn't moved, yet Clara felt exposed, as though every line she had drawn, every hidden truth within her sketch, was being uncovered in his silence. Thornton leaned closer. His shadow stretched across the paper as he bent slightly, tilting his head as though the sketch demanded angles to reveal its secrets. His hand, clasped loosely behind his back, shifted forward, hovering just above the table. Though he did not yet touch the drawing. To him, time seemed irrelevant. To Clara, every second was thunder. Her mind raced with questions. Why was he staring? What did he see? Did he notice the imperfections? Was he about to dismiss it, like everyone else? Or worse, was he lingering out of pity? But his face gave nothing away. His expression was calm, unreadable, the kind of stillness that held more weight than words ever could. Around them, the current of the exhibition shifted. People who had once ignored Clara's booth now stole glances. Curiosity sparked, not by her work, but by his presence. Patrons adjusted their path just to peek at what Thornton was seeing. A murmur ran through the aisle, though Clara barely heard it. Her world had shrunk down to the man before her, and the fragile piece of paper between them. Finally, Thornton moved. His hand descended slowly, deliberately, and with the gentleness of someone handling glass. He lifted the sketch by its edges. Clara's breath caught in her throat. No one else had touched it that day. Not once. She had watched dozens pass by, their gazes sliding off without care. But this man, he held her sketch as though it were not paper, but something alive. He tilted it, letting the overhead lights strike across its surface, revealing faint textures the casual glance would miss. He turned it slightly, studying the way shadows deepened the strokes, the way the pencil's pressure created subtle gradations. Clara's fingers twitched at her side. She felt vulnerable, naked almost, watching someone inspect the very piece that carried her heart within its lines. Thornton's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, not in disapproval, but in concentration. It was the look of a man finding something he did not expect, something that drew him deeper the longer he looked. Clara shifted uneasily, her lips parting as though to speak, but she stopped herself. What could she say? "Do you like it?" The words felt too small. "It's just a sketch." That would sound like dismissal of her own soul, so she stayed silent, her chest rising and falling with quiet anticipation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he looked up. His gaze met hers. It wasn't cold, it wasn't even distant. It was sharp, yes, but sharp in the way a beam of light is sharp when it pierces through a crack in the dark. For the first time that day, Clara felt not overlooked, not dismissed, but and being seen was terrifying. Thornton lowered the sketch gently back onto the table, his fingertips leaving no mark. He straightened, folding his hands once more behind his back, his posture commanding yet composed. Clara swallowed. Words scraped against her throat, but none came out. He spoke first. "This is yours." His voice was low, steady, with a weight that made the question feel far more significant than the words themselves. Clara nodded, then found her voice, though it trembled. "Yes, I drew it." His gaze lingered on her for a moment, then returned to the sketch. "How long did it take you?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her about her process before. Not here, not ever. People wanted prices, not stories. They wanted value in currency, not in time. She hesitated. "Several hours, though, in truth, it felt longer. I started at night and didn't notice when morning came. It was one of those moments where you don't measure in hours." He tilted his head slightly, considering her words. That sound quiet, thoughtful, made Clara's heart pound faster than outright praise would have. He leaned in once more, his finger tracing the air just above certain strokes, never touching, but indicating places where the pencil's texture shifted. "These lines, they aren't random. There's intent. You layered pressure here, but then softened it here. It's subtle, but deliberate." Clara's eyes widened. No one had ever noticed that before. "Yes," she whispered, unable to stop herself. That's exactly it. I wanted contrast, weight and fragility, like strength hiding beneath something delicate." For the first time, Thornton allowed the ghost of a smile to touch his lips, not broad, not warm, but enough to show approval, enough to show recognition. "Interesting," he murmured. Clara's breath trembled. Her fingers curled at her sides, holding back the swell of emotion that threatened to spill. The crowd around them grew denser now, drawn by the silent magnetism of Thornton's attention. Whispers floated. What is he seeing? Why her booth? Why that sketch? But Clara barely noticed. In that moment, the world had reduced to the thin sheet of paper between them, and the rare man who had finally looked at it as though it mattered. Thornton lifted his gaze once more, meeting hers with an intensity that was both daunting and validating. "There is more here than meets the eye," he said quietly, and with those words, the weight of the day shifted. The sketch was no longer invisible. The murmur of the crowd swelled around Clara's booth, but for her, sound seemed to blur into silence. The only thing clear was the man before her, Mr. Alexander Thornton, and the sketch between them that had, until this moment, lived its life unnoticed. His words echoed in her ears. "There is more here than meets the eye." Simple, quiet, yet powerful enough to shift the ground beneath her feet. Clara felt the thundering of her own heart, so loud she feared he might hear it. Her sketch, the same piece dozens had passed over, the one she had considered pulling from the table altogether, was suddenly the subject of scrutiny, admiration, and perhaps discovery. Thornton's eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. He studied Clara briefly, as though gauging not only her art but the artist herself. Then, without flourish or haste, he spoke again. "Tell me," he said, his tone calm yet deliberate, "what compelled you to draw this?" The question pierced her, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she had never been asked. People saw sketches as commodities, decorations, or investments. Rarely did anyone ask about the soul behind them. Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the table as though grounding herself. It wasn't planned," she admitted softly. "It came one night. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts felt heavier than I could carry, so I poured them onto paper. Every line felt like breathing out something I couldn't say aloud." Thornton listened, his expression unchanged. But there was a depth in his stillness, the kind that suggested her words were not just heard, but absorbed. He glanced down at the sketch again, tilting his head slightly as if aligning her explanation with what he saw. "It shows," he murmured. "There's tension here, conflict in the strokes. Yet, beneath it, there's restraint, discipline, as though chaos wanted to spill, but you refused to let it." Clara's breath caught. That was exactly it. He had articulated what she herself hadn't fully been able to put into words. A small, almost imperceptible smile flickered across her lips. "Yes," she whispered, "that's what I felt." The crowd around them thickened. Patrons leaned closer, whispering among themselves, "What does he see? Why this sketch?" Eyes that had once passed indifferently over Clara's booth were now drawn to it, not by the paper itself, but by the authority of the man studying it. But Thornton seemed unaware or unconcerned with the gathering attention. His focus remained entirely on the art and the artist. Slowly, with deliberate care, he reached down once more and lifted the sketch. This time, he held it higher, angling it toward the lights. The overhead lamps revealed subtle textures invisible from afar, the varying pressures of graphite, the faint smudges where Clara's fingers had blended shadows, the delicate gradations that gave depth to seemingly simple lines. He turned it slightly, examining it from different angles. Each movement was meticulous, as though the paper held secrets only patient observation could reveal. Clara felt her chest tighten with a mixture of fear and awe. Watching him handle her work was both exhilarating and terrifying. For years, she had wondered if anyone would ever see what she had put into her art, and now, here he was, lifting every hidden detail into the open. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thornton lowered the sketch gently back onto the table. He did not rush, he did not dismiss. Instead, he placed it down as though returning something sacred. Then he looked at Clara. "This," he said, his voice carrying quietly yet firmly, "is not ordinary." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Thornton continued, his tone as measured as his movements. "Most people glance and see only pencil marks, but look closer, and there is intention in every line, weight in every stroke. This is not decoration. This is expression, and expression, when true, is rare." The words hit Clara like waves crashing against stone. She had always hoped, quietly, desperately, that her work meant more than scraps of paper. To hear it spoken aloud, to hear him say it, felt like validation deeper than she had ever imagined. She stammered, voice trembling, "I didn't think anyone would notice." Thornton's gaze softened, just slightly. "That is because most people do not know how to look. They seek the obvious bold colors, loud statements, spectacle. But art worth remembering whispers before it shouts." Around them, the crowd's whispers grew louder. People leaned in, trying to glimpse the sketch that had caught the eye of Alexander Thornton. A few began murmuring to one another, pointing, speculating. Clara's booth, once deserted, was now the center of quiet gravity. But Clara herself hardly noticed the growing audience. Her focus remained locked on Thornton, and the weight of his words settled into her bones like warmth against the cold. He gestured slightly toward the sketch. "Do you realize what you've created?" Clara blinked, struggling to answer. I only drew what I felt. I didn't think of it." As he interrupted, though not unkindly. "That is precisely why it matters." She froze. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "The moment you stop creating for others and begin creating out of necessity, from truth, from what cannot be silenced, that is when art transcends craft. And this sketch carries necessity." Tears pricked at the corners of Clara's eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to let them fall in front of him, in front of the curious crowd now orbiting her booth. But inside, something shifted. A knot she had carried for years loosened, replaced by a fragile thread of validation she had longed for, but never dared expect. For the first time, she whispered, almost to herself, "You see it." Thornton's gaze met hers again, steady, affirming. "Yes," he said simply. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but profound, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Then, with calm finality, he said, "This deserves more than passing glances. It deserves to be seen." The murmurs of the crowd swelled into a quiet storm, people craning their necks, their interest no longer casual but urgent. Clara's sketch, once ignored, had become the focus of the room, and in that moment, Clara understood. The unveiling of value was not loud, not explosive. It was quiet recognition, the kind that redefined everything. The murmur in the hall had changed. What was once a sea of casual chatter now carried undertones of curiosity, even envy. Clara's booth, so quiet all morning, had become a focal point. People craned their necks, whispering her way. Some leaned in to get a better look, others stood back, waiting to see what would unfold. But inside the booth, for Clara, the crowd barely existed. Her world had narrowed to a single moment. Mr. Thornton's words, the weight of his gaze, and the sketch that now lay between them like a bridge between two worlds. He straightened, his presence commanding without effort, and spoke with a calm authority that seemed to silence even the whispers. "This," he said, nodding slightly toward the sketch, "is not something to be overlooked. It carries more weight than its surface reveals. Clara's heart pounded. No one had ever spoken about her work in such a way. She swallowed, her voice trembling. But it's only a sketch, a small one at that. Surely, compared to the others, he raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence, not rudely, but firmly. There is no only in art, he said. His tone was steady, each word deliberate. Size does not dictate significance, nor does color, nor spectacle. The loudest piece is not always the truest. What matters is intent. What matters is honesty. Clara felt her chest tighten. His words pierced the doubt she had carried for years. The doubt that had whispered she was too simple, too plain, too invisible to ever matter. Thornton leaned closer once more, his voice lowering so only she could hear, even as the crowd pressed in. You did not draw this for them, did you? You drew it because you had to. Clara's throat tightened. She nodded slowly, barely able to form words. Yes, I couldn't keep it inside. It felt like it would suffocate me if I didn't put it down on paper. His eyes softened, though his expression remained controlled. That, he said, quietly, is why it has worth. You did not create to impress. You created to survive. Clara blinked, her vision blurring slightly as tears threatened to rise. She quickly lowered her gaze, hoping he wouldn't see the raw emotion his words had stirred. But he did, and instead of stepping back, he pressed forward. Most of what you see here, he gestured subtly to the grander booths. The bold canvases that screamed for attention, is spectacle, crafted for eyes, for applause, for price tags. But this, he pointed gently to her sketch. This is different. It demands nothing, yet it draws everything. That is rare. Clara's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She could only stare at him, caught between disbelief and a fragile, rising hope. The crowd around them shuffled, murmuring louder now. Whispers of Thornton's words began to spread. Some patrons frowned, skeptical. Others leaned in with new interest, eager to see the sketch that had captured his praise. And then Thornton did something Clara could never have imagined. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, withdrawing a small, leather-bound notebook. He opened it, flipping quickly through crisp pages filled with neat, handwritten notes. Finally, he stopped, pulling out a card pressed between the sheets. He placed it gently on the table, just beside the sketch. This, he said firmly, I would like to acquire. Clara's breath hitched. The words stunned her into silence. Acquire her sketch. The thought almost seemed absurd. This was the same piece she had considered removing from display only hours ago. The one people had ignored without a second glance. And now, this man, this renowned dealer wanted to purchase it. Her hand trembled slightly as she looked at the card. His name was embossed in gold letters, Alexander Thornton, Fine Arts Acquisition and Consultancy. She looked up, her voice fragile. You want to buy it. He met her gaze steadily. Yes, but understand this is not simply a transaction. I do not collect for the sake of possession. I collect because I see worth. This sketch is more than paper. It is testimony. Clara's breath shook. She pressed her palms against the table to steady herself. I don't even know what to say. Say nothing, he replied. Only, consider what it means. Not the money, not the exchange, but the recognition. This, he tapped lightly beside the sketch, deserves to live where it can be seen, studied, valued, not hidden in a corner or dismissed. Her lips trembled. All her life, she had longed for this to be seen, to be validated. Yet, in this moment, it felt almost too much to believe. She lowered her gaze, whispering softly, almost to herself, I never thought anyone would care. Thornton's voice gentled, though it still carried its quiet strength. Then let this be your reminder. Value does not disappear because others fail to notice it. It remains, waiting, until the right eyes arrive. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek before she could stop it. She quickly brushed it away, embarrassed. But Thornton did not mock her, nor did he look away. He simply nodded, as though acknowledging the weight of her emotion without judgment. I will arrange the details, he said calmly. But before that, tell me, what is it called? Clara blinked, startled. Called every true piece carries a name, even sketches. You named it, did you not? Clara hesitated. She had never thought the name would matter, but in the solitude of creating it, she had whispered one to herself, quietly, almost reluctantly. She said, I called it Between Silence and Storm. Thornton's eyes flickered with interest. He repeated the words softly, almost tasting them. between silence and storm. Fitting. He gave a single, approving nod. Yes, very fitting. The crowd buzzed louder now. Whispers of the title spread just as whispers of Thornton's interest had. Some frowned, dismissing it as luck. Others nodded, recognizing the gravity of what was unfolding. But Clara heard none of it. Her heart was too full, her mind spinning with the weight of everything happening. She looked at Thornton, her voice trembling. Do you really think it's worth something? For the first time that afternoon, his lips curved into something more than a restrained smile. It was not wide, not showy, but it carried sincerity. No, he said quietly. It's worth more than you realize. The words struck her like a bell, ringing through every doubt, every insecurity she had ever carried. And for the first time, Clara let herself believe. The announcement spread like ripples in a still pond. At first, only those closest to Clara's booth had heard Thornton's words, but whispers travel faster than truth in a crowded hall, and soon the entire exhibition buzzed with fragments of the story. The great Alexander Thornton had purchased a forgotten sketch. Some scoffed, dismissing it as exaggeration. Others hurried over, pushing against the flow of people to catch a glimpse of the artist no one had noticed only hours before. Clara, however, felt as though she were underwater. Sounds reached her muffled, blurred by the rush of her own heartbeat. The world outside her booth seemed distant, unimportant compared to the weight of what had just happened. Thornton remained calm, unaffected by the gathering storm of attention. He stood with his usual quiet authority, making no show of his decision, offering no explanation to the onlookers. To him, the sketch's worth was self-evident. To Clara, it was a miracle she could scarcely grasp. Within minutes, the current of the exhibition changed. Patrons who had previously ignored Clara's table now pressed closer. Their eyes, once dismissive, carried a new glimmer. Curiosity laced with envy. Some tilted their heads, studying the sketch as though seeing it for the first time. Others leaned toward Clara, their questions sharp, their voices eager. Is this really the piece he chose? Why this one? Do you have more like it? Clara could barely answer. Her tongue felt heavy, her thoughts scattered. She clutched the edge of the table for balance, overwhelmed by the sudden shift. Hours earlier, she had been invisible. Now, she was the center of attention. Thornton observed quietly, letting the crowd swarm. When it became too much, when the questions grew more insistent, when strangers' hands hovered too close to the sketch, he stepped forward. That will do, he said, his voice calm but firm. The effect was immediate. The crowd fell back, subdued by the quiet authority in his tone. Clara exhaled, relieved. Though her chest still felt tight, Thornton turned slightly toward her, his expression steady. Do not let them shake you. Their interest is shallow. It will pass. What matters is what remains. Clara nodded faintly. She wanted to believe him, yet the pressure of so many eyes, so much sudden attention, pressed against her like a weight she was not prepared to carry. When the crowd thinned, Thornton leaned closer once again. Tell me, Clara, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. What do you intend to do now? The question startled her. Do now, yes? His eyes held hers. You have been seen. The door has opened. What will you do with it? Clara faltered. She had never thought that far ahead. Her dream had been simple, to share her art, to be noticed, even just once. She had never imagined what would follow if that dream came true. She admitted softly, I didn't think anyone would ever care. I didn't plan for this. Thornton studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. Honesty again. Good. Do not rush to answer. But know this, recognition is not the end. It is the beginning. And beginnings require courage. Clara swallowed hard, his words settling heavily within her. Courage? She had survived years of being overlooked, years of invisibility. But was she ready for the weight of being seen? As the afternoon unfolded, the echo of Thornton's choice continued to spread. Clara noticed subtle changes, the way patrons lingered at her booth, the way other artists glanced toward her with something between suspicion and respect. Even the exhibition organizers, who had barely acknowledged her that morning, now approached, with polite smiles and careful words. Congratulations, one of them said stiffly. It seems your work has drawn attention. Clara nodded politely, though she sensed the unspoken shift beneath their words. Hours ago, she had been a burden, of space, an afterthought. Now, She was an asset to their event, proof that they had hosted something valuable. It felt strange, almost surreal. The same sketch, the same table, the same artist. Yet everything had changed because one discerning eye had seen what others had missed. Thornton's guidance late in the afternoon, when the crowd began to thin. Thornton returned. He had stepped away briefly, speaking with colleagues, but now he was back, his presence as steady as ever. He gestured lightly toward the chair across from Clara. "May I?" She nodded quickly, surprised he would even ask. He sat, folding his hands neatly on the table, and regarded her with quiet intent. "Do not mistake this moment," he said calmly. "It is not chance. It is alignment. Your honesty met my attention, that is all." Clara tilted her head, frowning slightly. "Alignment, yes, in art, as in life, there are countless voices. Most go unheard, but sometimes rarely a voice speaks at the exact moment someone is ready to listen. That is what happened today. Do not waste it." Clara's breath caught. His words were heavy, but not cruel. They carried weight, the kind of weight that demanded thought rather than immediate reply. She lowered her gaze to the sketch, tracing the lines with her eyes. It was the same as it had always been, pencil strokes on paper. Yet now it seemed to carry something more. Perhaps it always had, and she had simply doubted too much to see it. When the exhibition finally closed for the day, Clara returned home, exhausted. Her small apartment felt both familiar and strange, as though she had stepped into it as someone slightly different than the woman who had left that morning. She placed the sketch carefully on her desk. Thornton had not taken it immediately, said he would arrange the purchase properly, with respect to her ownership. Until then, it remained with her, a quiet companion to the chaos of the day. Clara sat in silence for a long time, staring at it. The whispers of the exhibition still echoed in her ears, blending with Thornton's words. Value does not disappear because others fail to notice it. It remains, waiting. Until the right eyes arrive. She whispered the words aloud, as if repeating them would help them root deeper into her soul. For the first time, she did not see her sketch as small, as unworthy. She saw it as part of herself, a part that deserved to exist, to be seen, to be valued. And slowly, carefully, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more waiting beyond this moment. Thornton's letter 2 days later. A letter arrived. Heavy cream paper, sealed with wax. Clara held it carefully, her fingers trembling as she broke the seal. The handwriting inside was neat, deliberate, unmistakably Thornton's. "Miss Clara, our conversation lingers in my mind. I meant what I said. This is not an end, but a beginning. I will be in contact soon regarding the acquisition of your piece. More importantly, I would like to discuss what lies beyond it. There is a place for your voice, should you choose to let it be heard. Take time, consider carefully. Courage will be required." Thornton. Clara set the letter down, her breath unsteady, beyond the surface, beyond this one sketch, this one moment. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. She rose slowly, moving to stand before the small mirror on her wall. She studied her reflection, the same tired eyes, the same unassuming face, but something had shifted. For the first time, she saw not just the woman who had been overlooked, but the woman who had been found. The echo of recognition was still ringing, and Clara knew deep within that it would not fade. The morning light filtered through Clara's curtains, thin and golden, spreading across the sketch still resting on her desk. For days now, she had woken and fallen asleep with it nearby, as if afraid it might vanish if she looked away too long. It did not vanish, it remained, solid, quiet, steadfast like a promise. The letter from Thornton sat beside it, folded neatly, though she had read it countless times. Each word still burned within her. This is not an end, but a beginning. Those words frightened her, but they also stirred something inside her that had been buried under years of silence. A hunger, a possibility. Clara had always believed beginnings belonged to other people, those with connections, confidence, or resources. She had accepted her invisibility as fate. Yet now, the world had shifted. A beginning had been handed to her, unasked for but undeniable. And with it came the weight of choice. A week later, Thornton summoned her, not through assistants or intermediaries, but through a handwritten note. The address was precise, the time exact. Clara arrived early, her heart racing. The building was imposing, its facade lined with stone columns and polished glass. She hesitated at the door, her reflection staring back at her, small, uncertain, yet unable to turn away. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and ink, a receptionist, guided her down a hall into a private room, where Thornton awaited. He stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the city below. Sunlight caught the silver at his temples, casting a faint glow across his sharp features. When he turned, his expression was calm, steady, yet carrying that same piercing intent that had shaken her at the exhibition. "Miss Clara," he greeted softly. "You came?" "Ah, yes," she murmured, her voice catching slightly. He gestured to a chair. "Sit, we have much to discuss." Clara obeyed, perching on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thornton studied her for a long moment, then began. "Do you understand what happened that day?" she faltered. "You bought my sketch?" "That is the surface," he replied, shaking his head. "But beneath it, the world saw that I saw, and so they followed." Clara frowned faintly. "Followed? Yes, this is how recognition often works. Few have the courage to see first. Most prefer to echo what has already been acknowledged. They wait for someone to tell them what has value." His words struck deep, stirring both frustration and revelation. She had lived her whole life unseen, not because her art lacked worth, but because no one had dared to notice first. Thornton leaned forward slightly. "I will not always be here to be that first eye. You must learn to stand in your own recognition, to let your work speak, regardless of who listens." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I don't know if I can." "You can," he said firmly, "but you must decide to." The offer. Thornton reached for a folder on the table, sliding it toward her. Inside were documents, neatly arranged, along with an envelope containing payment for her sketch. Clara hesitated before touching it, as though the papers might burn her fingertips. "This," Thornton explained, "formalizes the acquisition. Your piece will join my collection." Clara nodded slowly, overwhelmed by the thought. Her sketch, once forgotten, ignored, would soon live among work she had studied in books, pieces she had never dreamed her art could stand beside. But Thornton's eyes held hers, steady and unrelenting. "That is not all. I want more than a single sketch. I want your voice, Miss Clara, not fragments, not whispers, a collection, a body of work that shows the depth I glimpsed in that one piece." Her heart stumbled. A collection. The word itself felt impossibly large, like a mountain she could never hope to climb. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice trembling. "No one ever is," Thornton replied simply. "Readiness is a myth. You step forward, and you grow into it. That is how beginnings transform into something lasting." He leaned back, his expression softening slightly. "I will support your resources, connections, guidance, but the work must be yours. The honesty I saw in your sketch must remain. If you chase what pleases others, the echo will fade. If you remain true, the echo will grow." Clara's eyes burned with tears she fought to hide. For years, she had been invisible. Now, someone was offering her not just recognition, but a future. That night, Clara could not sleep. She sat at her desk, the folder open before her, Thornton's words echoing in her mind. A collection, a body of work. It should have filled her with joy. Instead, fear wrapped around her chest like iron bands. What if she failed? What if the first sketch had been a fluke, an accident of alignment, as Thornton had called it? What if she was not truly worthy of the chance she had been given? She stared at the blank paper before her, pencil trembling in her hand. For hours, nothing came. The weight of expectation smothered her, louder than the silence of being overlooked had ever been. Invisible, she had suffered quietly. Seen, she felt exposed, vulnerable. At last, she set the pencil down, burying her face in her hands. A sob escaped her, quiet but sharp. "I can't do this," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm not enough." But even as the words slipped out, another voice rose within her, Thornton's voice, calm and steady. "Value does not disappear because others fail to notice it. It remains, waiting, until the right eyes arrive." She lifted her head slowly. The paper was still blank, but it was waiting, not demanding, not judging, just waiting. And so, with trembling hands, she picked up the pencil again. The days that followed were difficult. Every line she drew felt heavy, every mistake magnified by the fear of disappointing those who now believed in her. But Clara did not stop. Slowly, painfully, she began to find her rhythm. She drew not for the crowd, not even for Thornton, but for herself, for the honesty she had once poured into that forgotten sketch. she sketched late into the night, her small apartment filling with pages. Some she discarded, others she tucked away, but each one carried a piece of her, raw and unfiltered. The more she worked, the more the fear loosened its grip. What once felt impossible began to feel like truth. She had always been capable. The world had simply failed to notice. Now, at last, it was noticing. Months later, the collection was ready. The exhibition hall, once a place of dismissal and invisibility, now stood transformed. Banners bore Clara's name. Her sketches lined the walls, framed and lit, no longer forgotten scraps, but honored works. The crowd was large, buzzing with anticipation. Critics, collectors, patrons all gathered to see the artist who had been plucked from obscurity by Alexander Thornton's discerning eye. Clara stood quietly at the edge of the room, her heart pounding. She felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, but she did not shrink. Not this time. Because now, she understood, their gaze did not create her value. It merely reflected what had always been there. Thornton appeared at her side, his presence calm, grounding. He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You see," he murmured, "the echo has grown." Clara swallowed, emotion swelling in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head slightly. "Do not thank me. I only saw. You are the one who created. You are the one who endured." Tears welled in her eyes, but they did not fall. Instead, she stood taller, breathing deeply, letting the reality sink in. The forgotten sketch had become the seed of something far greater. Clara was no longer invisible. She was transformed. As the exhibition buzzed around her, Clara turned once more to the first sketch, the one that had started it all. Thornton had insisted it be displayed at the heart of the collection, framed but unchanged. Patrons crowded around it, whispering, studying, marveling. Clara stood before it quietly, her reflection faint in the glass. She remembered the years it had sat untouched, the way she had doubted its worth. She remembered the moment Thornton's eyes had found it, and the way everything had shifted. And she remembered his words, "Beginnings require courage." Clara smiled faintly. This was only the beginning.